Welcome, everyone. We're so delighted to have you today. We are broadcasting here from Montclair Design Week headquarters in Montclair, just outside of the Walnut Street station. And this is a particularly special moment because we are not only hosting an incredible panel discussion today, but it happens to also be the launch of Radio Free Montclair. We are broadcasting live across Montclair Design Week's website. You came here by way of designshed.org, and we are just so delighted about this event in particular because in every way possible, it speaks to our theme of this year, which is 100% Montclair. And we can think of no better way of beginning that conversation with this panel discussion that really tries to not just think about what a future, a Black inclusive future looks like for Montclair, but that it can actually become actualized. And I think this is really where we want to hit the hit the pavement with all of you and all of our panelists to see how we do that and make a plan forward and create a future together that is inclusive. And so, you know, Marilyn LaVergne is just a very thoughtful panelist, but also, sorry, moderator, but also a dear friend of Montclair Design Weeks. She has been with us from the very beginning, so she understands really how we are going to be able to grow and see this kind of endeavor moving forward. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Marilyn, and Marilyn will take it over to introduce all of our wonderful panelists today. So thank you so much for joining us.
So, hi everyone. We're a little bit low tech, but high tech. I want to thank everybody for joining us. The name of this panel discussion is Afrofuturism, Making or Broadening Black Spaces. Just to give you a little bit of a topical overview, Afrofuturism combines artistic and cultural practices with technology to intentionally design Black people into the future. For today, we will explore the world of Afrofuturism as it relates to the design of our living experience in Montclair. We'll look at this through the lens of urban design, architecture, art, and culture, because all of these disciplines shape the quality of our personal lives and our relationship to the community at large. This forum is intended to provoke discussion and inspire imaginations about the importance of Black folks taking the lead in how we're placed culturally in this community and how we must secure our needs for social facilities. Afrofuturism relies heavily on inspirations from music, art, and literature. In recent history, it has drawn reference from imaginative music by artists like Sun Ra and George Clinton. It also certainly recalls the collection of futuristic novels from Octavia Butler and N.K. Jemisin. Today, we point to music videos from Missy Elliott or Janelle Monáe, or films like Black Panther as inspirational touchstones of Afrofuturism. These influences direct our imagination toward our placement in society, and more specifically in our hometowns. Knowing that everything is designed, it's appropriate that we, Black folks, design ourselves into the future of Montclair, highlighting our cultural contributions and attending to our community needs. Without applying our voices to design of this community, our cultural contributions may be devalued and our community needs overlooked. Everyone possesses the capacity for serving Afrofuturism, and today's panel discussion will serve as a springboard to do just that. Right now, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Say hello to Nina Cooke John. With more than 20 years of experience, Nina Cooke John is principal of Studio Cooke John, a New York-based firm focusing on high-impact residential architecture and design for international cultural institutions. Her firm values placemaking as a way to transform relationships between people and the built environment. Currently, she is developing capabilities in strategic design applied to urban public spaces for the Jamaican Parliament, the City of Newark, and Stryker Park in New York City. She earned the Bachelor of Architecture degree from Cornell University and the Master of Science in Advanced Architectural Design from Columbia University. Next, I would like to welcome Kyrie Johnson-Ricks. Kyrie Johnson-Ricks is a New Jersey-based artist working in Newark. He identifies as a painter, animator, DJ, and dancer. His work analyzes conflicting symbols of masculine tradition through the guise of lyrical movement found in Shotogun, karate, voguing, hip-hop dance, video games, Buddhism, and chematology. His mural, Booty Bounce to This, recognizes the Jersey club youth culture that originated in Newark and has become a global phenomenon. The piece draws from elements of voguing, popping, flexing, and juke. It speaks to Newark's diverse background, which in turn produces a visual and physical language unique to the youth of New Jersey. He earned a bachelor's degree in fine art from Montclair State University and a master's of fine arts from Hunter College in New York. Next, I would like to introduce Lynn Toy. Lynn Toy is Chief Administrative Officer of Harlem School of the Arts, which serves hundreds of young students in dance, music, theater, art, and design. She creates multidisciplinary programs that prepare young artists for higher education and professional development. Currently, she is proud of HSA's $9.5 million renovation, which will expand its mission and service to the Harlem community. Toye recently launched Art Unpacked, an international collaborative fine art advisory that educates collectors and curates experiences that connect collectors, artists, gallerists, and those who support them. She produces a series of gallery talks, studio tours, and salons throughout the year. She holds a bachelor's degree in systems engineering from the University of Virginia and an MBA from Wharton School of Business. I'm today's moderator. My name is Marilyn LaVergne. And for today's discussion, I bring knowledge and practical experience to matters that consider the intersectionality of art, culture, community building, and economic development. I've held public relations and brand marketing roles at Newark Public Radio, which is WBGO-FM, the Newark Museum, and the Newark Downtown District. Those experiences led to my role as the Assistant Director of the Montclair Economic Development Corporation, which launched the Montclair Center bid. In recent conversations with colleagues and neighbors, it became increasingly apparent to me that systems of injustice exist in our built environments, and that we, Black people, need to center ourselves in reversing that reality. So a few weeks ago, I proposed today's Afrofuturism discussion to initiate and inspire our collective thinking about a quantum-sized future where Black people live, work, build enterprise, and enjoy our being in Montclair. I believe that Montclair Design Week is the ideal forum for this discussion, and I was pleased that the organizers of this festival agreed. I hold a BA degree in Mass Media Arts from Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia, and a graduate certificate in Interior Design from the Parsons School of Design in New York City. Let's get started. So I want to begin by saying that we are living in a situation where we're facing a pandemic and we're facing a number of social, economic, and political difficulties. And I want to ask everybody on the panel, how are you all doing during this pandemic, and how is it affecting your work? I'll start first with Nina.
This pandemic. Well, I think I've entered into a period in which I am really just trying to take every day one step at a time. This has evolved from intense anxiety back in March, back when we could not see into the future. We could not imagine what the future might look like. The future was very, very murky. And when we can't imagine the future at all, When we think that it's going to be drastically different from how we understand our current, it introduces a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear. So that was my state back in March. But I think now that we are, I don't know, what are we, 6-7 months into this? Like many other people, I've kind of developed a new sense of normalcy, but it's also allowed for kind of rethinking of, what it is we value, what's important, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's related to our communities, whether it's related to our families, our homes. So I think we can all say we're kind of at this point of reckoning, which might not have been here without the pandemic.
Absolutely. Kyrie, tell us, for you, how have you dealt with the pandemic, and what influences or impacts has this had on your work?
Oh, sorry, am I muted? Okay.
We hear-
Can you hear me? Okay, great. I don't know. I think the pandemic has highlighted some of the issues of fugitivity that poor Black people generally have to navigate, like housing, like weird money situations, unstable, environmental concerns. I live in Newark, where we're actively replacing lead pipes. Like, I have to filter all my water. You know what I mean? Like, just the normal stuff that, people have to navigate. So the pandemic hasn't actually affected me in any other way, any specific way or a special way that, general health concerns do for someone who, doesn't really have health care, what I mean? So, like, it's kind of just like the cherry on top of the bullshit cake that is
Right.
living as a poor person,
Has your work been impacted by what's happening right now?
In a bizarre way, it's kind of allowed me the time and space to really focus on making it. So it's actually kind of a positive in a weird, bizarre way, Yeah.
Sure. Lynn, can you talk a little bit about how this has impacted you and the work that you do?
Sure. The work that I do at Harlem School of the Arts and also on my platform, Art Unpacked, deals primarily with advocacy for young people that want to pursue the arts, or for people that want to support professional artists. And what I found from the very beginning is how fragile the ability to earn a living and support yourself if you are a full-time working artist, how fragile that is, and how quickly supporting artists fell way down in the priority list. So we had issues of hunger and homelessness and health that really went to the forefront in terms of philanthropy and how people would support. And fortunately, now we're seeing foundations, we're seeing grassroots organizations shining a light on how important it is to support artists, because one thing that I think we've all realized is that through the political turmoil and the health scares, we really don't want to live in a world without art, music, literature, and all that it does for our souls. So I would say that my work has become amplified in terms of spreading the word about the importance of supporting artists always.
Sure. Speaking of, and thank you all, because I realize that question can hit us in an intimate way. Speaking certainly, Nina, to what you were saying, there was so much that we couldn't expect and that we couldn't anticipate. And I think that it exposes our own vulnerabilities, both personally and professionally. And so thank you all for your candor. Speaking now of Afrofuturism, I'm going to ask each of you to describe Afrofuturism in your own words and articulate what we want to have, or what you would like to have people to take away from this discussion. Kyrie, I'm going to start with you. How would you describe or define
Sure.
Afrofuturism?
I, you know, I don't know. I think that Afrofuturism encompasses a lot of different conflicting ideologies, and that like Afrofuturism is kind of, a fraught umbrella term for a lot of different future-facing Black practices. For me, I'm interested in, liberation of all Black people, which is a future-facing idea, but not necessarily what we think of as Afrofuturism being based in like Black sci-fi or fantasy sort of questions or speculative fiction, which are useful tools for the liberation of Black people, but not necessarily the mode with which we get there, So I think Afrofuturism is a future where Black people are free to determine for themselves what their spaces look like and who they get to be and what kind of work they get to do. So that's that.
Sure. Nina, Kyrie just spoke of mode. In terms of the work you do as an architect, and I think that architecture is a mode, through which, life transpires. How would you define Afrofuturism, in the context of the work that you do and the work that you see coming up?
Well, I've been thinking about Afrofuturism a lot recently with a particular project that I'm working on with the Black Artists and Designers Guild, which is a virtual concept house. And the way that we've been using the term, or I've been really looking at the term, is when Black people dream, what is it that they dream about, right? It is, and I was in a talk recently in which the artist Alicia Wormsley was talking about her project, There Are Black People in the Future, and she describes it as being a positive response to a kind of negative present, right? Where we are taking the best from our current situation and potentially our past situation, collective situation, and creating this positive future for ourselves that is, it is amazing, right? And it's this kind of optimistic view of the future in which all the ills of today are kind of annihilated and we can rejoice. You think of the Chocolate City song and all the amazing people and places and things of today, we kind of bricolage into this visual future that we create for ourselves. Like, we are making this future, we are creating this future, we are imbuing this future with all the values that we think are important now or were important to our immediate ancestors, or past. I see Afrofuturism as both being forward looking as well as backward looking, right? Like, people look to, my grandmother used to do this, or people say back in when we lived in rural communities we used to do this, or back to Africa, right? So to then create this future that, again, I just loved how she termed it as this kind of positive reaction to a negative present.
Sure. Lynn, share with us what you think of Afrofuturism is, and if you were to explain this to somebody who'd never heard the term, what would you want them to take away?
Well, actually, I love the bridge between Nina's answer and Khari's answer, and I really want to build on that, because Khari, something you said about freedom, and Nina, something you said about the past are really important to me, because as I thought about today and what I would have to share, something that we try to unwind, especially for young people, is the concept of what is our history, what is our historic link to art, to architecture. And so when I think of Afrofuturism, I think it's very important to acknowledge that Black and Brown people have been doing amazing creative things since the very beginning of time. And as we see ourselves into a future, what I'm looking for is for us to dismantle some of these notions that, you know, the best art is classical art as defined by the masters that are European. I listened to a talk by Marcus Samuelson, and he was talking about how, you know, when he was learning to be a chef, it was good because it came from French culinary traditions, and how hard he had to work to talk about, you know, the global influence of so many different flavors in the continent of Africa. So for me, Afrofuturism has to really begin with the past and knowing that we have a torch to carry and that we can validate what is good, you know, what belongs in the future and what's going to be considered good, that we don't have to look to another gaze, but we also can define what makes it valid.
Absolutely. Do you guys think that there are misconceptions about what Afrofuturism is? And if so, what can be done to sort of combat that? I know, Khari, I keep coming to you, but you know, what misconceptions do you think there are that exist that need to be corrected?
I don't think there's misconceptions that need to be corrected. I think that with a lot of Black, you know, practices, they're stifling, you know, environmental and social factors that don't necessarily allow us to build on the infrastructure that's already there. So, you know, thinking about just like, you know, sci-fi in particular, right? Like you know, the example of Black Panther being this utopian society that somehow is still aligned with upholding white supremacist, you know, imperial US politics against someone who is a terrorist is a bizarre sort of thought process, right? Like, it's like Killmonger is like, he's a terrorist, yes, but also like, why would this supposedly untouched state in Africa be aligned with the US in this way, right? Sure. So when we think about, these stories, or we think about these cultural products or whatever, we have to really consider like where the gaze is pointed and like why our thinking in this direction is formed in the way that it is. So for me, like, I'm, just in the practice of like making my art, right? Like taking it off of a rectangle. Like a thing like that is a thing that we've always done. I mean, if you look at indigenous practices, I'm part indigenous or whatever. If you think about like painting on cow hides, that's not a rectangle. It's a body of an animal, you know what I mean? Right. Or making African sculptures, or making masks.
What happened? Did we just lose him?
Maybe some Wi-Fi issues.
Could be. Vanessa, I think, is going to work out here. I see him back. There you are, Kyrie. Vanessa, can you unmute him?
Yeah, sorry. That was crazy. But yeah, like just the idea of like making a form that isn't the normal, formulation of what people consider to be fine art is a small revolution in itself, or like a small, something. It's a small something in a direction.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think that it is a seemingly small, center of resistance or a center of power, but I think that it's very powerful in and of itself, to explore things that are germane to our history and our cultural practice. I agree. Nina, you mentioned something earlier about the fact that so much of the future is tied to our past, where we recognize and acknowledge, habits, traditions, um, cultural norms that were established in Africa, and that we brought with us. These things were so deep down in us; they're part of our DNA. Can you talk, perhaps, from any experiences you've had where those things have been either misunderstood or there've been misconceptions attached to them? Anything like that in your observation or experience?
I think sometimes when we are, drawing upon historical cultural traditions from Africa, it oftentimes is limited to, the spiritual or, very specific or continued reference to only a certain part of the cultural tradition. And I think it flattens out what is a rich cultural tradition, and also an idea that you're universalizing the large continent of Africa, right?
Yes.
So there are things that might have been happening in South Africa that were not happening in, Senegal, that were not happening in Ethiopia, or that were happening in Ethiopia, weren't happening in Mali, right? It's a big continent, and it has a very, very long history. And the history, yes, it has, significant spiritual context, but there was, art and science and sociology and, everything that we can think of. So I think depending on people's interests and their lens, they will pick and choose. But very often, those things associated with, the less logical, I'm going to say, and the more spiritual are more generally and Black people do it too, right? We're saying, yes, Africans were more spiritual and more, maybe not. It was just different from what it was presented to us. There's just a rich culture there that I think we can tap into, that I think we don't. And I think we all of us here in the West, including Black people, because we only know what we've learned so far,
Sure.
kind of reduce Africa to a trope.
Sure. I'm going to move into now questions about reimagination. In other words, moving from the, what is now, to imagining what our future can be going forward. And to that end, and I've written down a few things. What do you think, and Lynn, I'm going to direct this at you first. What do you think the biggest challenge is to Afrofuturistic thinking? And in that, I mean, in placing ourselves in future communities, and, with that, and I hate to ask two questions in one, but I will. What critical changes do you think we need to make in order to actualize, a better future for ourselves?
Yeah, well, Nina, I love what you said about reducing Africa to a monolith, a trope. And I'm seeing, especially in the art world, a tremendous amount of interest globally in following artists from the African diaspora. It's now, Christie's is on board. There's the 154 Art Fair, which started in London. And what I'm hoping is that not only it become part of a global conversation, but it be driven down to the youngest people in our community, and that our community would start to understand the nuances regionally, in terms of all the richness that comes from Africa. The Afro part of Afrofuturism, I would love to see it be more than just, like the word of the day or something that's trending, and to have it be something that's truly understood. I don't think it's being taught. I don't think it's really being driven through popular culture. And I think it has to start with the youngest people. Your second part of the question was what, about fixing problems, or how do we?
Yeah. What steps can we take to try to, yeah, to correct the problem of, well, I shouldn't say to correct the problem, to amplify our thinking about the future. A lot of times, I think that we become so myopically focused on what's in front of us, what's happening right now, that we neglect to look forward and say, okay, we need to design ourselves into a future that is not just positive or better than what we've had, but I mean, really amplify the way we live and the way we expect to live. Was that a lot?
I'm going to throw something out here that steers us away from the creative, but it we can't have a full conversation without talking about it. Power and money.
Oh, yeah.
You know, artists are passionate. People, you know, live in a built environment, but to have a life, I think what we need to do is see a redistribution of wealth creation, and power shift, so that as we design ourselves into a future, we have voice at every single table that we need to be at in order to see us thrive as a group of people.
Absolutely. Kyrie, I know you and I spoke briefly early on about, you know, the fact that while art is intended, especially public art, is intended to inspire the people that are engaging with it on a regular basis, it also may have a double-edged sword in the sense that it can be used as a tool to build the economy of people that don't live in the community, or who live in the community but are not benefiting. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I mean, okay. So I have a couple of things that I'm thinking about here. I'm thinking about the relationship between, you know, just like art washing, which is like, what I guess what you're describing,
Sure.
and like capitalism, like, so basically just like murals are, you know, a lot of the time murals and art installations outside can be co-opted by companies to raise the property value of their spaces. So, you know, you buy up a bunch of land in the hood and then put murals on them and like do a bunch of like cute, you know, beer, you know, brews and brushes type of things. And then all of a sudden, like the rent is going up $300-400 and you're like, why? For the same apartment, you know? Like for instance, like my apartment is probably the most expensive unit in this building. And that's over the last couple years, you know, last 3 or 4 years. And it's like, why, you know? It's because of all the arts programs and all the cultural programs that North is trying to enact, you know? And then also these big companies who have employees that move here and they want to incentivize those people moving here. So they give out these like, you know, housing incentive grant things, you know? So like, it's a really deep thing, you know? And it positions itself outside of questions of race, you know? It tries to center capital as, you know, capital and urban renewal and stuff like that. So it really is kind of an insidious, weird thing that you have to contend with as like, you know, a Black person living in a place like Newark or a place like Montclair, you know.
Sure. And I think it's an issue that's faced by many people in cities, certainly across this country, but I think it has impact in cities around the world. Nina, as an architect, are there ideals, or initiatives to address the problem of affordable housing, but affordable housing that really is fair, just, and equitable to the people who already live in an urban space?
Well, I know that the organization Black Space.
I love that organization.
You haven't heard of them?
No, I said I love them.
Oh, yeah.
We were trying to get one of their founders to join us for this discussion today. He was out of town though. But yeah, I love what they're doing. Go ahead. I didn't mean.
Yeah, and I think they are looking at, they are a group of planners, urban designers, and architects who are looking to address exactly that question. How can you kind of equitably, build, design, and policy make Black people into the future ultimately? And their manifesto, I think, is, an amazing document, and
Yeah.
just, bits and pieces of it, I think are really, they talk about creating circles, not lines, in terms
Yes.
of involving dialogue with the local community, move at the speed of trust. So really in terms of getting communities to trust you, and by actually being trustworthy, choose critical connections over critical mass. Again, it's about kind of deep engaging with the community, and not just coming in and storming through as the all-knowing kind of having all the knowledge and kind of implanting it onto this community. Plan with and design with the community, so that you're really responding to their needs, and not just your ego in terms of what you think is best, right? But
Right.
even more critically to our conversation, this idea about celebrate, catalyze, and amplify Black joy, where Black joy is a radical act, give due space to joy, laughter, humor, and gratitude. And, I won't read all their tenets, but this idea that, they have developed this manifesto that's well thought out in different ways, but ultimately being based on this idea that when you go into the community, the needs of the community are first and foremost. And there are really strategic ways in terms of engaging with that community, so that you're not ultimately displacing the community in what started off as, a positive endeavor, but because of the way that it got carried out, really doesn't benefit anyone that was there before you came in.
Yeah. So I want to say to everybody who has joined us as a guest, and also to panelists, when you have a moment free, it is time very well spent to visit blackspace.org. Their manifesto is just, it's one of the most powerful things that I have come across in terms of addressing the issues of affordable housing, that also celebrates and amplifies the community that is already there. I thank you, Nina, for talking about what they do. As I mentioned, we were seeking to have one of their founders to join us for this discussion today, but he was out of town and just wasn't able to join us. But it is something that I'm hoping we can duplicate, here in Montclair, and certainly to people who are listening or participating. If you're not living in Montclair, or you're not living in Montclair later on, consider some of the thinking that is established by Black Space to incorporate in your own communities. I want to talk about, before we go away from this subject, do you guys think that in the last 5 to 10 years that there have been specific changes or influences that impact the way we collectively think, we Black people collectively think about the future, that we implement right now in our lives? Lynn, anything come to your mind with regard to that? Oh, can we unmute Lynn?
Here I am. I feel that it differs actually by generation or by life stage. I was so inspired by the average age of young person that I saw leading marches, leading rallies, doing grassroots organizing in a very thoughtful way. When we saw some of the riots and protests that were going on over the summer, the pure rage and the way it was processed by different ages dictated how people responded to it. And so in terms of collective thinking about Afrofuturism, I find people that might be the age of, my parents or our parents, have a much more conservative view about what's possible, about what can be done, because they lived in an era where, it was a privilege just to be able to go through a certain entrance, to use facilities, to have something from a water fountain. And therefore, the idea of what was a good job versus something that felt too risky, or even admission into a certain kind of a college or higher institution of higher education, they just have different boundaries. And what I'm inspired by is young people that are in high school and college age and, early in their careers, who don't see the same limitations. So I'm betting on them.
Kyrie, speaking of age groups, without asking everybody's age, I gather that you're probably the youngest member of our panel today. So in your, maybe give or take, for you in the last 5 to 10 years, what do you see that may have been, that is important to how we think and how we imagine ourselves in the future?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think that, I think I have the same response as Lynn. Like, Black Lives Matter is a decentralized, dispersed power structure demanding Black liberation. Like, that's a radical future that I'm down for, you know what I mean? Like, they can't kill our leaders. You know what I mean? There's no leader.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's the thing that I'm betting on, regardless of if Trump wins or if Biden wins, the battle is the same,
Absolutely.
That's how I feel about that.
Absolutely. Nina, for you, any things you've observed or experienced in the last 5 to 10 years you think that has influenced the way we're thinking about the future, we Black people are thinking about the future?
I think, similar to what has been said, it's this idea that we need to kind of ramp up the pace of change, right? And I think this understanding that, okay, so change has been happening. We understand that the arc is long and, into the future. However, it's really time to start cooking with gas, right? And things that, like Lynn said, in terms of being generational, where some people's like, yes, well, when I was a kid, we couldn't do this, this, and this, but now we can. And then people younger than myself are like, yes, but we really need to make some radical change. We need to pull the rug out from under all that's going on right now, because we can't wait 200 more years for any kind of significant impact.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
I want to jump in on something that that Khari and Nina both said. The concept of the movement and risk. So people from past generations, the amount of fear of what might happen. You could lose your job. All these terrible things that could happen. I see a fearlessness among young people. I see a fearlessness with their choices of work. The concept of the gig economy. If this doesn't work, I'll just get another gig. Not that it's easy, but the perceived fear of, what if this doesn't work out, doesn't seem to pose the same barriers. And we also have at our disposal social media, which drives messaging so much faster. So Nina, what you're talking about ramping it up and cooking with gas and speeding it up, we now have tools that were not available, not even 5 years ago. And the way people are organizing and communicating is that much faster. And the final thing that's interesting is this concept of cancel culture. That people are just done with you and over with you. And if we need to be done with someone or we need to cancel someone, how effectively that messaging can be driven through large groups of people is very powerful.
Yeah, yeah. I hadn't even thought about that, Lynn, but you're right about that. I think that part of the generational, let's say, adaptation to making these changes is driven by tools that were not available to, our parents or our ancestors, and the quality of definitive choices, that people are making their own choices. And I think that, like Kyrie said, there isn't one leader. So since there isn't one leader, there's an equality in leadership, right? I mean, I can decide that I will tell 20 people to meet me at the corner of Main and Central Avenue, and we're gonna launch a march because of what just happened at the ATM machine this morning or something like that. Whereas before, there were all these channels that you had to go through, and you had opinion leaders, at least, who had to endorse what was going to be said or the message that was going to be conveyed that we don't have now. So yeah, no, that is true. I'm going to move on now to questions about the future of Afrofuturism, right? So it's like talking about the future. Khari, what do you got? You were laughing.
No, I have a little bit of, I don't know. I feel like the stakes are really high. Yeah, the stakes are really high. Like, like there's a few things happening that are really, for me as like a younger person, that, that are alarming to me. Some of them being like the ways that social media has actually capitalized on disparate movements happening on their platforms, in the ways that surveillance happens, in the way that surveillance is connected to, the kinds of ads and the kinds of internet search results that I get as this kind of person, but I feel like maybe some thinking, more rigorous thinking about the tool, like social media tools, is necessary for someone like me,
Sure.
And I'm also thinking about like just like climate change and like the underlying refugee situation, climate refugee situation that is going to exacerbate questions around race and capitalism that have already resulted in all kinds of horrifying human rights problems on the continent of Africa, into Europe, and same thing within our own continent, at the border. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think you raise a good question. And it's one that I don't think that, it's been, like you said, these things are horrifying and the stakes are high. I think that matters of safety and security kind of loom large over us every day in our everyday lives, whether we're at home asleep in our beds, or we're out to take a jog, or we are bird watching. There's a sense that we are not secure, that we're not safe, that there is danger. And so to that end, I'm wondering from each of you, just given your own backgrounds, what do you think we should or could look towards to create a safer outcome for our people in our lived environments? And and this includes the built environment, but also the public spaces and our private residences. Nina, I'll start with you.
Can you repeat the question again, just the beginning of it, just so
Sure. The question is, what do you think would be the best futuristic outcome to help to secure security and safety for Black people moving forward? And this Nina, would be whether it's in our private residences, in our public spaces, in the built spaces, just in the places where we are. What practices can we adopt or start to think about adopting to create security for ourselves?
Yeah, that's tough.
And
Because
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know that was big and broad.
yeah, because it, if it's about what practices can we take on to guarantee our safety, I think a part of our fear and sometimes sense of hopelessness is that we feel like we don't have any control over that, right? I'm in my own house sitting and watching TV and someone comes into my apartment by accident, you know, for whatever reason and then kills me. Like, what could I have done differently?
Right.
There's almost nothing I could have done differently, right?
Right.
Nothing at all. So, there is this sense of, hopelessness sometimes, which what we're trying to combat with this idea of Afrofuturism. And maybe it is that we just have more control over the forces that are acting upon us. What does that mean? Is it about, how we take over, certain policy making, certain, again, the money and power, like where does the money and power go to? Because ultimately, those are the people acting on us. We can only do so much. I cannot walk into my house and triple barricade the locks every night. Like that's not going to help me mentally. That's not going to help my family. So it's really about influencing. It's really, it's about organizing within your community and affecting the things that you can affect outside of your individual home to then be able to feel secure in your home, right? You need to be active in your local government more than anything else, because those are the things that are going to directly affect you.
Absolutely.
And speak up in terms of how your local law enforcement is acting within your community and how funds are being distributed within your local community, because that sometimes has a bigger impact than national politics.
Sure. Um, um, and that I agree with you on. I think that security has, as you were speaking, Nina, I was thinking to myself, you're absolutely right. There's nothing I can do about somebody crashing down the front door and, coming in with guns a-blazing. And that's an experience that is not foreign to our people. I also, think about, and this is one of the things that inspired me to want to start this conversation, is that I think about the Ninth Ward in New Orleans, that there were people that came before the residents who lost their homes and their lives and their livelihood, who designed it so that the Ninth Ward is where the Black people live. And if you ever all have a chance to visit New Orleans and see where that is, given what happened, you can't help but recognize that was a death trap waiting to happen. When I look at a lot of the choices that were made about how New York City's communities were brought about and developed, and how in many cases there was deliberate plans to design Black people either out of the benefits of the city growing and developing, or those things were either done deliberately or they were just neglected, so those are things that I think we can try to harness some control over in the modes that you talked about, which is policy making and in making our voices heard the way a lot of the protests are now. Lynn, in your role as an arts educator, what practices do you think we can incorporate that would bring about, a better futuristic opportunity for our people?
Yeah. Well, something that was, a phrase that I've seen out here now is that we are more than just a moment. And so, we saw all of these things come to such a huge crescendo behind a number of different events that were unfolding over the summer. And what I was thinking as I didn't feel that my health could tolerate being out and being in the midst of a march for a number of different reasons, is that everyone can play a role, and it's so multi-layered that it's as important to have somebody who's cooking and preparing food for the people that are marching as it is for the person who might be playing their drum, or the person who's making signs, or the person who's making masks. And I would just challenge anyone who's listening to think about how you can live out your purpose if you are committed to seeing Black people in the future, whether you are a person of color or whether you are an ally. And if you feel that you're on the outside of this, there is so much that you can learn. Of course, in the midst of all the George Floyd crisis, I think probably all of us, got that text from the white friend saying, hey, how you doing? And, maybe you could help me understand how maybe I'm not doing it right. And those texts haven't, they all flared up in late June and early July, and I haven't seen as much of it. But the concept of how all of us can find a place in terms of ensuring and ushering Black people into the future is where I'm at. And so in terms of a place like Harlem School of the Arts, or a platform for teaching people, it would be to challenge every person to use your gift in the very best possible way to make it into a collective effort.
Yeah. And on that note, and Hannah, who is our technician, and Vanessa, you guys let me know if there are any questions from guests or listeners, because much to Lynn's point, questions and feedback are a gift, and I don't want to overlook that. If there are, any questions for any of our panelists. Anything in there, Hannah? I know she'll share with me. No comments. Okay. So we are now at 4:59 p.m. Eastern time. So we've been talking for an hour. Before we stop, I want to hear from each of you about projects that you have upcoming, things that you want people to know about, ways that we can look forward to things that you're doing. And because this conversation is intended to be a seed planted for further communication, for people to kind of look to this as a way to be self-inspired and to put their own designer to use to design our future going forward. But I want to hear certainly from you all what kinds of things you're doing. Nina, what do you have coming up? And I know you and I have talked about the concept house that Badge Guild is doing, but tell us more about it and the other projects you're working on.
So yes, this is, very directly related, I think, to the topic, in that, what emerged from very practical needs from designers in the Guild whose show houses were, shut down because people couldn't kind of enter these houses and take a look at the work they're doing, and deciding to make it a virtual house, but then really thinking about pushing the envelope and say, why don't we make it a concept house, similar to a concept car, which is really testing very specific ideas, especially since we have the freedom of this virtual environment, right? And how can we start to look at it more specifically in terms of Black family life and what, and in its multiple, permutations, and what that might mean, and how it can become a space that really fosters the mental, physical health and well-being of the Black family, and what that might mean in this space. So I'm really excited about that, and it launches in the winter. But it really came out of the pandemic, and it really was looking at how Black people were disproportionately affected by the pandemic because of, institutional racism and its effect on our health, on our purses, on our general, well-being. And then separately, I have an installation project coming up in the Flatiron Plaza, which is going to be installed the weekend of November 20th through 22nd, and it'll be open for 6 weeks starting on the 23rd. And really, it was a commission that I got during the pandemic, and it looks very directly to the idea of engaging with public art while we're social distancing, and the existing issues within New York City in terms of there's so many different kinds of people that live and rub shoulders in New York all the time, but never really make eye contact, right? We don't really know each other. And how would you have known that I suffer all these, prejudices on a day-to-day basis if you don't really look at me and you don't really know me? So I'm looking forward to that opening very soon.
And when does that open, Nina?
On November 23rd.
November 23rd. So we'll probably still be able to be outdoors for a while longer and be able to see that exhibit. It looks like something that we can engage personally with. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. So it will be
selfie opportunity.
Yes. So go have a day, an afternoon in the city and walk around and, experience it in a very different way post-pandemic, not post-pandemic, but, mid-pandemic.
In mid-pandemic. Thank you. Khari, tell us, what are you up to and what can we look forward to from you next?
I am currently, well, I don't really have anything like I'm just working in the studio. Like I don't really have anything for you guys to like
That's
see
okay.
really.
Working in the studio,
yeah. Like
there's going to be something that we're going to see from you soon.
I have a solo in March, but that's it. Yeah, I don't really have anything other than that. Hopefully I'll have some more talks that I've been organizing these talks for Rutgers with Jersey Club producers and stuff. So that's been cool, but I don't.
Is this Newark? Is this the Newark campus or other campuses?
Yeah, Paul Robeson Galleries has a residency that I'm participating in, but as a placeholder for like not being in the studio, I'm just doing talks right now. Sure. Hopefully I can get back in the studio there and I'll do some programs.
Excellent, excellent. Lynn Toy, what have you got coming up? Oh, hold on. Can we?
Okay.
Hannah, can we unmute? Okay.
I'm here. So I'm so excited about this transformational construction project where we have now have a fully glass visible curtain wall at Harlem School of the Arts, which is at 141st and St. Nicholas. It is a beautiful space for performance and gathering and community. And so I really look forward to the day when I can invite everyone who's listening to come and see what we have going on there, but also to let everybody know that we have a fully virtual semester for children from ages 3 to 18. We are running virtual classes in art, music, theater, and dance. And my priority for pandemic or non-pandemic is all about building community around the arts, whether it's young people at Harlem School of the Arts or through the platform at Art Unpacked. As soon as we are able to do so, I will kind of reignite some of the salon series that I was doing to organize curated experiences in galleries, at auction houses, at artist studios for artist talks, and then at the art fairs. I hope to be able to launch the travel portion of it, where we can gather in Miami at Art Basel, in London at the 154 Gallery, in Venice at the Venice Biennale, and super excited that Simone Lee was named as the first Black woman to represent the United States at the Venice Biennale. So it's things like that that I would love to see Black and Brown people occupy and be in those spaces around the world.
Sounds interesting. I think we're all looking forward to being able to get back to traveling at some point. I think that's been another one of the disappointments of this pandemic that we're in. I want to take a moment and I want to thank all of you all for joining us. This has been a truly insightful discussion, and it's something that is new for Montclair Design Week, but I think it's new in more ways than one. because normally we would have probably been in an auditorium or a public space where we could interact more with people. I'm hoping that this discussion has sparked everyone's interest and imagination about willfully creating, designing, and manifesting a better future for Black people, certainly here in Montclair, but also in the community at large. I want to express my appreciation to Hannah Salverin and Vanessa Vizaga for audio direction and managing our live stream broadcast over Radio Free Montclair. I also want to say thank you to our panelists, to all of you all that joined us, and to Design Shed, the producing organization of Montclair Design Week. I want to take a moment now to urge everyone to visit designshed.org and learn more about the 30+ events scheduled throughout this week. This festival brings you thought-provoking, playful, and yes, radically inclusive events that put your inner designer to work on building a more equitable future. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon, and hope that you have a great weekend. And I look forward to any of you all or all of you all joining us this week for Montclair Design Week.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. This was great. Really, really good to be here.